when you see a kid on Halloween wearing one of those, mass-produced plastic Headless Horseman costumes, there is this built-in expectation of harmlessness.
Oh, absolutely. It's totally sanitized.
Right. You look at the foam pumpkin tucked under their arm, the exaggerated cape, and the whole narrative just feels, well, entirely safe. Sanitized for mass consumption, like you said.
Yeah, it's just a fun autumn festival fixture for most people now.
But if you start peeling back the layers of the folklore, the history, and the ancient trauma, that plastic mask melts away very quickly.
It gets dark fast.
It really does. For you listening, we are tracking the evolution of a single terrifying story today. Welcome to the deep dive.
We're looking at a mythological lineage that spans, ancient Celtic history, Catholic hagiographies, German moral folktales, and American literature.
And to understand where the fiction begins, we actually have to abandon the Halloween cliches. We need to step directly into a landscape of really gruesome historical reality.
Because before the Headless Horseman was a ghost story used to scare children, it was rooted in the visceral, terrifying realities of medieval Ireland. And specifically, ancient Celtic beliefs about the human body.
Okay, let's unpack this. We really have to talk about the ancient Celts and their relationship with the human head.
Right.
Because taking a head in battle wasn't just some, savage display of brutality or a simple trophy hunt. There was a highly specific, calculated spiritual logic at play here.
Yeah. The early Celts believed that the human soul didn't reside in the heart, as so many other cultures did, but squarely in the head.
Wow.
The head was the absolute seat of a person's being. So the practice of decapitating an enemy was a really deliberate act of spiritual warfare.
So it's not just about killing them.
No, exactly. By removing the head, you are actively dehumanizing them, capturing their spirit, and entirely denying their soul any peace in the afterlife.
Yeah.
You are breaking their metaphysical existence.
That is just incredibly bleak. And this belief didn't just, fade away in the myths of ancient mythology either. It carried over into actual documented history.
With devastating consequences, yeah.
During the late Tudor rule in Ireland, the British government literally weaponized this cultural trauma. They offered head money.
Head money. Just the phrase is chilling.
Right. The crown paid bounties to anyone who could present the severed head of an Irish rebel. It was an explicit tactic to terrorize the population using their own deepest spiritual fears.
And the archaeological record really backs up the sheer scale of this trauma.
Oh, really? What did they find?
Across Ireland, archaeologists have uncovered numerous skeletons, both male and female, with their heads forcibly removed. But the most telling detail is actually how they were buried.
What do you mean?
They have found human skeletons buried alongside dead animals that were also missing their heads.
Wait, I want to make sure we understand the mechanism here. Why bury a human with a headless animal? Is that meant to be, the ultimate insult to the dead?
It is a calculated degradation, yeah. By placing a human in the earth alongside a mutilated beast, you are permanently degrading their status, not just in the ground, but in the afterlife.
You are equating their soul, or I guess their lack of a soul, to livestock.
Exactly.
So out of this immense cultural trauma, this literal landscape of severed heads and spiritual warfare births the Dullahan.
Right, coming from the ancient Celtic god Crom Dubh.
And the Dullahan is nothing like the vengeful ghosts we see in modern movies, is he?
Not at all. The Dullahan is the absolute personification of inevitable death. It doesn't haunt a specific graveyard because it was wronged in life.
So it isn't seeking revenge for a murder or anything?
No, it is an unstoppable force of nature.
The descriptions in the folklore are just pure nightmare fuel. The Dullahan rides a massive black horse. It carries its own decaying head tucked under its arm, or sometimes held high above it.
And the head glows faintly, like a lantern, so it can see across the countryside.
Yes. And its weapon is horrifying. It uses a whip made entirely out of a human spinal cord.
In some of the most chilling reasons of the lore, the Dullahan doesn't even ride alone. He drives the Coist Boathar, which is the death coach.
A whole coach?
Yeah, imagine a carriage pulled by a team of headless horses. The spokes of the carriage wheels are constructed from human thigh bones.
That's so macabre.
And the entire thing is illuminated by empty skulls hanging from the sides.
I keep thinking of the Dullahan as the ultimate supernatural hitman. There is no bargaining. There is no pleading your case.
None. The lore says that if you try to lock him out, gates and doors physically burst open when he approaches.
And when he finally stops riding, he just calls out your name, and your soul is instantly ripped from your body. You die on the spot.
Just like that.
So if this creature is the absolute embodiment of inevitable death, Is there literally any defense against it in the folklore?
You cannot outrun it, and you certainly cannot fight it. But the mythology does offer one highly specific defense.
Which is?
If you throw a piece of pure gold in his path, even just a small gold coin or a piece of jewelry, the Dullahan will immediately flee.
Wait, why gold? I mean, why not iron, which is traditionally used against fairies and spirits in, most European folklore?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reflects an ancient, almost universal human belief in the protective, purifying power of precious metals.
Oh, because gold doesn't tarnish.
Exactly. It doesn't rust or decay. In a mythology completely obsessed with the rotting of the flesh, severed body parts, and the decay of the grave, pure gold represents the incorruptible.
It is the one physical substance that the embodiment of death and decay cannot touch.
Precisely.
That makes perfect sense. It's the literal antithesis of rot. But I'm stuck on something here.
With that?
We have this deep-seated Celtic belief where the severed head is the ultimate symbol of pagan terror, inevitable death, and spiritual trauma. But as history moves forward into the Christian era, the narrative of the severed head takes a wild turn. The Catholic Church starts recording hagiographies, the lives of the saints, and a surprising number of these holy martyrs are walking around holding their own severed heads.
They really are.
Doesn't that risk making the holiest figures of the church look exactly like the pagan monsters the locals were already terrified of?
What's fascinating here is that the church understood they couldn't just erase deeply ingrained cultural memories overnight.
They couldn't just tell them to forget the Dullahan.
No, the local populations were already conditioned over centuries to associate a severed head with immense spiritual power and magic. So, rather than fighting that association, the church systematically absorbed it.
It was a necessary cultural translation.
Exactly.
It feels like the church was deliberately hijacking the native folklore here. Were they using the severed head as a narrative tool to basically replace terrifying pagan demons with inspiring Christian martyrs?
Yes, using the exact same visual iconography. They maintained the supernatural awe that the people expected from a powerful story, but they rerouted the meaning entirely.
Toward Christian piety.
Right. This birthed the era of the cephalophore, which literally translates to head carrier.
Like St. Denis.
Yes. You see this with major figures like St. Paul or St. Denis in France, who famously picked up his own head after being executed in Paris.
And he carried it over a mile to his chosen burial place, right? Preaching a sermon the entire way.
He did. But it's the Celtic hermits that really show how this local folklore was completely digested by the church.
You have figures like St. Justinian, St. Nectan, St. Frimond, and St. Gwynir, and their stories all share an incredibly specific narrative pattern.
The pattern is remarkably consistent, and it's very distinct from formal Roman executions. These Celtic hermits are usually depicted living highly secluded lives in the woods.
Usually near a stream or a holy well, right.
Always near water. They're murdered, usually by thieves, pirates, or private enemies, and upon being decapitated, the headless body miraculously rises, picks up the severed head, and carries it directly to a body of water.
To wash the head clean before the saint finally passes away.
Exactly.
You also have the legend of St. Winifred. She was a virgin saint whose head was struck off by an angry suitor she rejected.
A classic martyr story.
But in her story, her uncle, St. Bruno, miraculously reattaches her head to her body and brings her back to life. It leaves only a thin white scar on her neck.
It's such a deliberate flip of the mythology.
It really is. Instead of a demonic hitman coming to steal your soul in the dark, the headless figure is now a model of ultimate piety.
It completely transforms the severed head from a tool of pagan terror into a testament of divine miracle. The saint has conquered the ultimate physical trauma through the power of Christ.
It becomes a symbol of holy asceticism, the ultimate victory of the spirit over the mutilation of the flesh.
And what's wild is how this ecclesiastical rebranding bleeds right back into secular literature.
Oh, absolutely. We see this exact blending in the 14th century romance, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
A perfect example.
The Green Knight is this towering, supernatural figure who bursts into King Arthur's court. Gawain chops the Green Knight's head off with an axe, and instead of dying, the knight just calmly picks up his bleeder head by the hair.
Just mounts his horse and tells Gawain to meet him in a year.
Right. The Green Knight is a brilliant synthesis of everything we've just discussed. He presents almost exactly like one of these cephalophoric martyrs.
He holds his head, he holds the instrument of his death, and where does he operate?
Out of the Green Chapel.
Which is located right beside a rushing stream. He is the raw, ancient nature magic of the Celts, perfectly merged with the visual iconography of a Christian saint.
Okay, so the church successfully turned the headless figure into a holy saint. But how on earth does it devolve back into a terrifying monster by the time we get to 17th century Germany?
Geography and religion shift the meaning again. In German folklore, the headless figure loses its divine grace.
Because of the Protestant Reformation?
Exactly. The Reformation stripped away a lot of the reverence for Catholic saints and miracles, but the headless figure didn't revert to the demonic hitman of the Irish either.
What did it become?
It morphed into a tool for moral policing.
Here's where it gets really interesting. In Germany, they have tales of Der Kopflosrider, the Headless Rider. These figures aren't saints, and they aren't inevitable forces of nature. They are revenants. They are the cursed spirits of known sinners who are forced to wander the earth to atone for the very specific crimes they committed in life.
And their method of interaction with the living is highly symbolic and highly functional. In some Rhineland myths, these headless riders are incredibly dangerous. They can kill a victim simply by touching them.
But there is a specific survival mechanism, isn't there?
There is. If a stranger encounters the horseman and holds out a tree branch instead of their bare hand, the rider will touch the branch. The branch instantly withers and dies, and the human is spared.
I love this detail because it acts like a narrative pressure release valve. But how exactly does a withered branch function psychologically for the people telling this story?
Well, you have to imagine living in an era where death genuinely feels random and uncontrollable. Plagues, famines, sudden illnesses, death could touch anyone at any time.
A myth like the Dullahan reflects that raw helplessness perfectly.
It does. But the German myth introduces a loophole. It gives the peasantry an illusion of control over random death.
Ah, I see.
If you just know the right trick, holding out a branch, you can survive an encounter with the supernatural. It makes the terrifying world feel a little bit more navigable.
It gives them agency. But the story that really captures this shift toward moral panic is a specific folktale from Dresden in the year 1644.
Oh, the story of Hans-Jürgen Teufel.
Yes. And I want to set the scene for you listening because the details are incredible. It's a quiet Sunday morning. A woman is out in the woods near Dresden, gathering acorns.
Just minding her own business.
Suddenly, she hears a massive blast from a hunting horn, followed by the heavy crashing sound of a large tree falling in the forest.
A very dramatic entrance.
She looks up and sees a man in a long gray cloak riding a gray horse. He's wearing boots and spurs, he has a bugle horn on his back, and he has absolutely no head.
And in this first encounter, he just rides past her quietly. He doesn't attack.
But the story doesn't end there.
No, it doesn't.
Wait, this is where I have to pause. Because 9 days later, she's back at the exact same spot in the woods, peeling an apple. And she hears a voice behind her. Ask if she has been punished for taking a whole sack of acorns the week before.
Right.
She turns around, and it's the headless man in the gray cloak. Only this time he's on foot, and he is carrying his head under his arm.
And the lore specifies the head is covered in curly brown hair.
And the severed head actually speaks to her. He stops to lecture her about stealing acorns. That sounds less like a terrifying monster and more like a grumpy local magistrate catching a trespasser.
That is exactly the point. The horror of the severed head has been localized and completely domesticated.
Wow.
And what the head says to her next is the entire crux of the German mythology. The head tells her, "Ye do well to pray to God to forgive you your sins. It was never my good lot to do so."
He literally confesses his whole life story to her. He says his name is Hans-Jürgen Teufel, and he lived 130 years prior.
He admits his faults.
Yeah, he says he constantly ignored his father's advice, he drank to excess, he caroused, and he was incredibly cruel to the poor.
And as a direct divine punishment for his wickedness, he is cursed to wander the woods as an evil spirit forever.
It's basically a ghostly, scared straight program for 17th century peasants. So the narrative function of the severed head has completely flipped.
Entirely.
It's no longer about how you might randomly die, but a strict warning about how you are supposed to live.
This is a masterclass in how communities police themselves using folklore. The myth was utilized as a sociological tool to enforce social norms.
It terrified the local population into sobriety, obedience to parents, and charity to the poor.
The visceral horror of a decapitated corpse is harnessed entirely for civic morality. If you drink too much and disrespect your elders, you will wander the woods forever carrying your own head.
So we have the inescapable Irish trauma, the majestic Catholic martyrdom, and the strict German moral panic.
A really diverse lineage.
But none of these, not the Dullahan, the cephalophores, or Hans Jagenteufel are the headless horsemen most of us picture today.
No, they aren't.
To get to the pumpkin-throwing icon, we have to cross the Atlantic. We have to see how all these rich European myths collided with the very real, very recent bloodshed of the American Revolution.
Which brings us to the definitive American ghost story. Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, published in 1820.
And the setting here isn't just an arbitrary backdrop. Irving didn't invent this landscape out of thin air. In 1798, to escape a massive deadly yellow fever epidemic sweeping through New York City, a young Washington Irving fled upriver to Tarrytown, New York.
And Tarrytown was a heavily Dutch settlement, deeply entrenched in its own localized customs. Irving soaked in the local gossip, the superstitious nature of the residents.
Even the names from the local graveyard, like Van Tassel.
Yeah. But Irving was also an incredibly well-read, well-traveled author.
Right. He brought an extensive literary background to this local gossip. He was mentored by the Scottish writer Sir Walter Scott.
And Scott had recently translated a famous German poem by Gottfried Berger called The Wild Huntsman.
So Irving already had this rich, moralistic European folklore rattling around in his mind.
He had all the pieces.
But what grounds Sleepy Hollow and makes it distinctly, undeniably American is how Irving tied the myth to the actual traumatic war history of the region.
Yes. The Headless Horseman in Irving's story is entirely stripped of holy martyrdom or centuries-old moral curses. He is explicitly identified as the Galloping Hessian.
And to understand why that matters, you have to know who the Hessians were. They were incredibly fearsome German mercenaries that the British Empire hired to fight the American colonists during the Revolutionary War.
They were professional, ruthless soldiers who brought immense violence to the local communities.
And Irving's crucial detail about the horseman losing his head to a cannonball wasn't purely an invention for the sake of a ghost story.
No, you can actually trace this back to a real, documented memoir from an American general named William Heath, published in 1798.
Wait, really? A real decapitation?
General Heath noted that during the Battle of White Plains, which incredibly took place right around Halloween in 1776, a Hessian artilleryman really was decapitated by a shot from an American cannon.
And that was less than 10 miles from where Irving was staying in Tarrytown.
Exactly.
It's incredible to think about. Irving takes this literal bloody piece of very recent local history, and he weaves it into the story of Ichabod Crane.
Ichabod is this lanky, deeply superstitious schoolmaster. He is vying for the hand of the wealthy Katrina Van Tassel against the local tough guy, Brom Bones.
And the key detail Irving includes is that Ichabod obsesses over Cotton Mather's history of New England witchcraft.
A very specific reading choice.
Did Irving intentionally strip away the heavy religious and moral baggage of the European tales to create a purely psychological thriller for a new nation? Why make a point to tell us exactly what Ichabod is reading?
Because Irving is showing us the psychological mechanism of the horror. Cotton Mather was a real historical figure heavily involved in the Salem witch trials. Yep. By establishing that Ichabod constantly reads Mather's accounts of demons and witches, Irving shows us that Ichabod's mind is already deeply primed to hallucinate the supernatural.
It's a brilliant study in confirmation bias.
Totally. When Ichabod rides through the dark woods, every shadow and sound is filtered through the terrifying books he's been reading.
So it all culminates in that iconic, terrifying midnight ride. Ichabod is chased through the woods by the Headless Horseman, who ultimately hurls his severed head at Ichabod, knocking him off his horse.
But the next morning, when the townspeople search the area, there is no blood, no ghost, and no body.
All they find is a shattered pumpkin in Ichabod's hat.
That's it.
So what does this all mean?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Irving did something absolutely vital for the young United States. At that time, the country was newly independent, but it severely lacked a deep, homegrown mythology.
It didn't have castles or ancient pantheons of gods.
Right. By taking European folklore, injecting it with local Dutch flavor, and anchoring it in the fresh trauma of the Revolutionary War, Irving gave America a unique cultural identity.
And the brilliance of Sleepy Hollow is its perfect ambiguity. Was it a genuine supernatural encounter with a dead Hessian? Or was it just the burly Brom Bones holding a pumpkin, playing a cruel prank on a highly superstitious man who had read too many witch books?
Irving leaves it entirely open, blending fact, fiction, and psychology flawlessly. And that ambiguity is what makes it a masterpiece.
We've tracked this incredible narrative journey for you today. We started with the visceral, blood-soaked spiritual warfare of Celtic decapitations and the inescapable Dullahan.
We saw how the Catholic Church translated that terror into the holy resilience of cephalophoric martyrs.
We traveled to Germany, where the severed head was utilized as a sociological tool, a moral warning for the peasantry to stay sober and charitable.
And finally, we arrived in the Hudson Valley, where Washington Irving blended thousands of years of myth with American Revolutionary War trauma to create the ultimate ambiguous legend.
It is a profound example of how a single narrative continuously adapts to the psychological needs of the culture telling it.
Absolutely. The core image, a body continuing to act without a head, is universally biologically disturbing. But what that horrifying image is used to represent changes entirely based on the anxieties of the time.
But the evolution doesn't just freeze in Sleepy Hollow, because as America expanded, the anxieties changed and the myth kept moving. And we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder on your own.
As the American frontier pushed aggressively west, the story reinvented itself yet again, this time in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of 1850s southern Texas.
Down in Texas, a piece of folklore emerged known as El Muerto. And unlike Sleepy Hollow, this wasn't born from an ambiguous romantic rivalry or a prank with a pumpkin.
No, it came directly from the brutality of frontier justice.
According to the legend, which was rooted in a real historical event, a horse thief was captured by local vigilantes. To make a terrifying example of him, they didn't just hang him.
They beheaded him.
Then, they tied his headless body firmly to the saddle of a wild Mustang, tied his severed head to the pommel, and whipped the horse, sending it galloping off blindly into the scrubland.
That grim, localized reality birthed a brand new legend. The story of a headless rider that haunts the Texas plains. A phantom whose wild horse strikes the ground with hooves that flash with lightning.
It just goes to show you, when you look at that cheap plastic Halloween mask, you aren't just seeing a simple scare.
No, you are looking into an ancient, constantly evolving mirror.
As long as there are new frontiers, new conflicts, and new cultural anxieties to process, the Headless Horseman is never truly finished writing. He just changes his mount, adapts to the feels of the era, and waits for the dark.